So welcome back. In last video we saw that this method was returning a null pointer exception. So everywhere we need to handle like this, if name not equal to null. So in Java 8 is there any solution to handle this? As we already know that optional is newly introduced in a Java 8. So the implementation or the Java doc of a optional class. So what is this? This is a container object which may or may not contain a not null value, a non-null value, which may or may not. So let's check out what are the methods in it. So you can see here you have an optional method, and how is the syntax? Optional of, it's a type class, right? Optional T. So let's change our string to optional string. Implement it from the Java util. You can see here as you return it to optional string, this is complaining and it is saying that wrap with nullable optional. Let's do for now this to avoid the compilation error, and here on the calling, okay, it is saying you that this is the optional string. So in this way, as we were discussing earlier, if we can throw an exception and it will say the calling method that you need to handle it. Now you know that the return type of this is not a string, it's an optional string. Okay, so it is possible that there can be a null in it. Simple, right? Now we already knew it, that as it is returning optional, and optional may or may not contain the not null values, so we need to handle it. And what is the way of handling it? In the optional class we have one method is present, and then if it is present, then what is the way? Because it's a type class, type of string type, right, of optional. So let's get this string first. It will return me the string. You can see it is returning me a string, and now on a string I can do to uppercase, right, what we were doing earlier. Now let's try to run the same program. You can see nothing is printed, that means it's a null. And if I pass a 1, then you can see it is printing me a Piyush. That means name is present, because from here I got a optional of string with a value Piyush in it, right? And then I'm checking if present. Yes, it's present, Piyush is present in it. Do a uppercase on it and it is returning me a capital Piyush, right? So this is forcing a calling method that the return type is optional and it may contain the value null. So check first if the value is present, and if it's present then only do the operation. If not present, then do not do it. Now you will say we are doing the same thing, right? Earlier also we were checking name is not equal to null, and then we are doing an operation on it. But only ways here we got to know the enforcement, but the same piece of code or same line of code. So is there any shortcut in it? So the shortcut is name dot if present, then it is accepting a consumer, and consumer is, you can print it, right? We already knew it. Now that we can write like this, and it will print me the value. Okay, let's try to run it. It will return 2 times value, right? So this is the another way of doing, right? If you still think above is the overhead, and if there is a no value of a student, then print me some message, right? So let's try to print it. So on name I will check there is a method or else or throw. So let's check one by one. Or else I will print no student found. Okay, and I will pass 7 so that I will get something printed. You can see no student found, because here you are checking if present then only print. Here also you are checking if present then only print, but here I am checking if present then print the value, and if not present then print this. Okay, so if there is no value in it, print this. We already saw one thing, that if name dot or else throw. Okay, so if you want that we can throw a exception, so let's use type, let's use the method reference of a lambda, and if name is not present then throw a null pointer exception. So let's run it. You can see now to output no student found, and this line is printing a null pointer exception. Okay, good. In this way you can print else value, you can print the actual value, you can print the default value, you can throw the exception if value is not present. These are the operations you can do on the optional. Okay, and the another one, here you can see optional of nullable. Do we have another method to handle? So you can see there are 3 methods. Empty, if there is empty you need to pass it as empty. Of nullable, of nullable we already saw, if there is a null value then it was returning a empty value, empty, right? So and you are checking, so what happened earlier, this was the actual case. So here what we were doing earlier, optional of nullable name. So if there is a null then it was returning a empty. See here, when I debug the code, now for the value 7, name is optional dot empty. So when there is a null value, then actually optional string is returning optional empty. So which method is responsible to do this? This is optional of nullable. So let's check out the definition of nullable. Return a described specified value if not null, and otherwise return an empty. Okay, so this is the method, and on that empty you are checking is present, then is present. If it's null then it's not present, and if it's not null then it's present, so print it. Okay, so let's check the another method in optional. Instead of what we have empty, so if it's empty you can pass empty. We have one more method, off. Let's try to run the code on off method. So what is the difference between optional dot off, optional of nullable? Okay, let's run the code again. Sorry. So let's run the code again. You can see on line number 11 to 38, here optional of name is a null and it throws error of null pointer exception. So let's comment everything. Let's run the project. You can see null pointer exception simply by calling this method. That means off method, you can see return an with the specified present not null value. If value is null, it will throw a null pointer exception. So this off method is not good if its value is a null. Okay, and if it's possible that value can be null, then use another method called as off nullable. Okay, now you understand the difference between off nullable and off. Now we practically saw what is optional. So what is optional? Optional is a container object which may or may not contain a non-null value. We saw that if you are using off method of optional, then it cannot contain a not null value. It cannot contain a null values, right? and if it's a off nullable, then it can contain null values. So optional is a container object. It's a container object which may or may not contain a non-null values. Optional object is used to represent null with absent value. We saw in an earlier example that if you are using off nullable and if you pass a null to it, then it will give you an empty object, right? Absent value. And if you are using off, then it will throw a null pointer, etc. So optional object is used to represent null with a absent value, and it has a utility methods to handle values as available or not available instead of checking a null values. So if it's optional, then that means you need to check if the value is available or not and then do the operation on it. Okay, instead of in till Java 8, what you do, you can check, you are checking is value null or not. So before optional video, we were actually printing whatever value we were getting from the stream or from the terminate operation to the console. We were not collecting it and not passing it to another calling method. We were just printing it on the console, but practically you need to collect a data of a stream into a string, list, set or a map. You need to pass it to another conveyor belt or another calling method to process some task on it, right? So in next lecture, in next video, we are going to see how to collect data rather than printing in the console in a string, list or a set. So stay tuned.